Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new video for the Machine Quilting Party. So we've learned how to stitch zigzaggy pinstripes, we've learned how to stitch matrix maze. Now we're going to kind of take the two and combine them together with pinstripe matrix maze. Let's get on the machine and see how this design works with walking foot style quilting. So I'm working on Pinstripe Matrix Maze, and I hope you can see just how funky cool this design is. I really love the texture, but it is one of those types of designs that's easy to get lost in. So the first step is to quilt some pinstripe ziggies. That's just zigzag lines where you space the lines an inch apart and then a 1/4 inch apart. And I went on ahead and quilted that through the entire quilting space in one direction. So I've got lines that run through the entire square. And then now I'm quilting back across with more pinstripe ziggies to create this new design. And it is a little of an optical illusion, I'll be honest. Quilting the zigzags on top of the other zigzags, it's a little hard to tell what I'm doing, but basically I stitched that zigzag line, and then now I'm using a groove on my walking foot that spaces out a 1/4 inch to evenly echo that line all the way down. And I just have to train myself to ignore the lines that I'm stitching over, the perpendicular lines. It's a little confusing, and I would honestly say it might be easier to mark it so that way you can see what you're doing and better ignore the lines you're quilting over. But you know, it ends up working out, and I think it's going to create a really cool texture for our quilts. So now I need to create the wider spacing, and I'm going to do that with a ruler and attaching a guide to my walking foot. So this is something that this walking foot, this is the Bernina walking foot, and it's really easy to attach a guide to the back of it. Not all walking feet have this feature. Not all walking feet come with guides. And I'd say this is something that is important to look for when you're buying a sewing machine, is to double check the attachments and features that it comes with or that you can buy extra, because, you know, honestly, this is one of the best walking feet that I know of, and it comes with these awesome attachments. I've got a guide that goes both to the left and to the right, and they space out the lines beautifully. Now I'm having trouble getting in position here, so I'll lift the needle and just get myself into the right position. Basically what I've done is space that guide out so it's 1 inch away from the needle, and then now I've sunk the needle down so that I am right on this line of stitching, and now I'm going to quilt more zigzags, and basically it's an echo of that line before. The direction changes are the tricky thing, and this is where you need to really be paying attention to what you're doing and what you're echoing, because as I change direction, I just need to make sure that that guide stays in line with that previous line of quilting. As I come into the inside angle changes, I need to not stitch too far in so that when I shift and rotate, I've not overshot it and brought the lines too close together. And this is one of those things, it's just a space estimation kind of thing. I've been quilting a lot, and I can just visually, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of just an intuitive thing. I can just see that needle and see the line of stitching and go, that looks kind of like an inch of space. You know, here I'm not really using the guide necessarily. I'm just visually looking at it and kind of feeling that it's the right distance and then making a rotation. Now, what if you overshoot? Well, if you overshoot, that's not the end of the world. I would probably just continue stitching. If you really want absolute perfect spacing of your lines, then you're probably gonna have to rip it out. But honestly, I would say just keep on stitching, throw more thread at it. And as you can tell, this overlapping texture is gonna get pretty complex. I don't think it's going to be very apparent that you accidentally brought your lines a little closer together or a little further apart. And I really don't think that's a deal breaker. So my personal advice is throw more thread at it, keep on quilting, keep on trying new things. So now let's try Pinstripe Matrix Maze on a long arm. So here I am using the slice quilting ruler, and I'm just clicking my machine on and off as I shift the ruler and create a really random zigzaggy line. This sets the stage for the design, and this is going in one direction roughly from that corner of my quilting space down to this curving line. Now I'm going to travel stitch over very carefully 1/4 of an inch, or until the edge of my foot is right next to that line of stitching I just did. And I'm still getting the hang of travel stitching, and sometimes it's pretty and sometimes it's not. So you just have to kind of take it slow. And then now I am stitching back up and echoing that line. So you can see I'm lining up my ruler here with the edge of that foot and then steering the machine away. Now you might be wondering, I keep clicking the machine on and off, and that's just my preference. Of course, if you can handle holding the machine steady and moving the ruler at the same time, that's totally up to you. I don't like that because the machine tends to stitch in one place, and that can put a hesitation knot, just a little knot on the back of the quilt. So I tend to click the machine off whenever I'm moving the ruler around. And I do keep the ruler in my non-dominant hand. So this is my right hand. And then I am steering the machine and operating it with my left hand. I think that's the best way. It gives you the most control, but definitely play with it and see what works best for you. Okay, so now I want to travel stitch down, and you can see that area, don't have enough space to put another line of the design in it. So I want to stitch down until the second etched line on my ruler will line up with that line I just stitched. So I'm going to keep travel stitching down and then just line up the ruler and see if that's looking good. And that is looking good right there. So I'm actually going to back up just a bit and then stitch over. And again, I'm estimating my space. This is not going to be very much stitching. It's just this little pocket, just like that. I think I'll go all the way down. I'm going to travel stitch back and echo that. And it's a straight line, so I can just use that ruler on this side. And you can see how you're going to constantly, especially on a long arm, you're going to be using that ruler on all different sides of the foot, shifting it around. And a lot of movement just to get that design in there, get it stitched. And I gotta say, you might be looking at that going, wow, that's pretty time consuming. This is definitely gonna be something that you would do on a special quilt, something that you really wanna stitch up a notch and, put this extra bit of time into. Okay, so now I'm gonna stitch over and then down. I've got this little pocket. I'm gonna travel stitch over and stitch back up again. So you can see getting that pinstripe ziggy design in is pretty simple. You just start with a zigzag line and then use the ruler and your ruler foot to echo that, and that'll work just fine. Now I'm going to try and travel stitch on this curving line. This is a curve that I created with my, I can't do it. It's really tough. But I created this curve with my mini slide ruler, so I'm just going to grab that. And rather than rip out all that messy stitching, I'm just going to go over it a few times, just back and forth. And, when in doubt, throw more thread at it. And I think that looks better. I still have a little bit of a blip there, but it's not the end of the world. It really isn't. Okay, I'm going to do one more line so you can see whenever you have nice straightaways how to handle that. Here I'm lining up that ruler. And as I stitch, I'm just kind of gauging the distance between the edge of that foot and the next line. So, it's just an eyeballing it more than anything else. Here you can see I overshot that a bit, but I'm not going to worry about it. That wider spacing is it's kind of forgiving in a way. You can go a little wide, you can go a little narrow on it, and it's not going to catch your eye that it's massively off. You just don't want to overshoot it too far. But this is, really, it's a double step design. I'm going to stitch back over this with more lines of pinstripe ziggy, so it's really not going to be noticeable that my lines are off a little bit. And, that was the same thing for walking foot quilting too. Using the edge of the walking foot isn't exactly precise either, or that 1/4 inch mark on the walking foot isn't 100% precise, and it's not always easy to see. So this is one of those designs that you can get away with it not being just exactly perfect. Okay, now I'm coming down, doing my echo quilting. I love this 1/4 inch spaced lines. And you can see this is closer together than what I did with my walking foot. I had 1 inch of space between these lines. This is more like 3/4 of an inch of space, but it still looks great. Okay, so now let's start zigging off in this direction, and you basically just kind of make up the line as you go. Place the ruler like this, and I'm going to try and not click the machine off as I steer it in this direction. Let's see if I can do this quickly so I don't have to click it on and off. I'm always just trying new things, just experimenting. Whoops, you see how that is pulling up? That's right on the edge of the quilt, but I still don't like that. So I'm going to stitch right over and just go back and forth a bit. That's going to be in the binding area. It's always good to keep your eyes out for little issues like that. Go and secure it, get it knocked out. Okay, now we're going to stitch back over. Just some straight line travel stitching. Get in position. Now I'm lining up the edge of that ruler with the edge of the ruler foot. I love the control that this gives you. I promise you I could not quilt this as easily or as precisely without the ruler and ruler foot. Of course you can. This is free motion quilting on the long arm. You can move in all directions if I wanted to. I could take off and go wiggle around and do stippling or something. In fact, actually, let me just show you that. So if I wanted to fill in this pocket, this is a form of free motion quilting. So I can go and wiggle around and do stippling or sharp stippling or paisley, anything in this area. So you don't have to just use your ruler foot. If you ever find yourself getting bored or it's just taking a lot of time, then simply pick a design and start quilting that in a little pocket. And you can see how much faster this is because this design doesn't require, spacing out your lines so precisely. It doesn't require travel stitching. I really think that the speed of a design, more than anything else, comes down to how much travel stitching is in it. The less travel stitching you have, the quicker the design will be to stitch. So you can see, you can always switch to a design like stippling if you want to. So with the same foot, you don't have to change feet. But then whenever you want to get back to your ruler foot quilting, all you got to do is grab a ruler, press it against that foot, and you're ready to go. Okay, so now I'm spacing out, and I'm using the line that is 1/2 of an inch from the edge, or two edge lines from the edge. And as I stitch down, I'm seeing this space here between my foot and the ruler, and then I'm looking at this space here and trying to make sure that it's about the same. Again, it's okay if you overshoot, and it's okay if you undershoot it slightly. You might want to not try for a full 1/4 of an inch under or over, but a little bit here or there is not a problem. Okay, and so now we're turning this into Pinstripe Matrix Maze. So Matrix Maze is zigzaggy lines that are stitched together to create a zigzaggy grid, very irregular grid. When you take and pinstripe a design, you basically take it and you stitch parallel sets of lines 1/4 inch apart with some space between, so that turns it into a pinstripe. So now we're combining those two concepts together to create the Pinstripe Matrix Maze. Now you can see I blipped there completely. That was a bounce back. But as you can see, as this design starts to get more complex, is that something worth ripping out? I don't think so, because it really blends in a bit and you can get away with it. The design itself is very zigzaggy, so even if you do a little stitch off, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch this way and do another set of lines. So again, pull the machine down, careful stitching, space out that 1/2 inch distance, but then keep an eye on your next angle so that way you don't over or undershoot it. Here I'm keeping an eye on that angle because I need to go this way next, and I didn't stitch down quite far enough. There we go. Having some marked lines on the quilts can sometimes make this faster, but of course that takes a little bit of time to mark it. When in doubt, if you feel like that is going to help you, definitely pull out a marking pencil. Sometimes I find that having a fully marked design is actually a time saver. Here I'm going to actually just shoot this line this way because I think that'll make the design more interesting. See, I could continue to have echoed that, and that would have been perfectly fine, but I think it looked better to add a more interesting angle right there and go that way. So marking designs, you might feel like, oh, that's going to be so time consuming. I actually had a quilt that I quilted 3 different ways, and one design in particular was fully marked, one design was completely freehand, and one was kind of a combination of the two. And of the 3 designs, when I actually got to the quilting process, the design that was fully marked was actually the fastest to quilt. The actual, stitching the lines on the quilt was the fastest because it took all of the question marks out of the design. I no longer had to stop and make decisions. All I had to do was just simply stitch on the lines. So that might be something you want to think about as well. If you're feeling like, oh man, this is just really, really slow, it's not something that you want to pursue, consider marking the design. That'll definitely speed it up. Now it seemed to be consistently having the same issue. You see these little stitch offs. What it is I'm stitching a little bit too far and then I'm pulling the line back down again. I'm going to try stitching down and not making that mistake. Let's try and talk through how that mistake is happening. So what might be happening is as I shift, maybe I see that I need to move the ruler slightly, but the ruler foot is not next to it. So that's how I'm getting that subtle stitch off. So here, it looks like I'm doing it whenever I echo too. So I'm going to finish this line and then we're going to talk through the echoing. There we go. Now I'm going to travel stitch up and we're going to come up. So I'm looking at the edge of that foot to do this direction change. And then now what was happening is I think I was stitching just maybe a stitch or two too far. And then I could see that that was where my ruler needed to be. Well, I've got a little gap here. And what I was doing is clicking the machine on and then bouncing it down to hit the ruler. Instead, just going ahead and own that you stitched a little bit too far. I think that will end up looking a little bit better. You can see that time, while my line spacing wasn't exactly perfect right there, that looked better, I think, than that, where I got that little peak. And then in that spot, you can see my thread did something kind of funky. I think right there, I stitched in place a few times, and that probably created a little hesitation knot on the back of the quilt. So, yeah, pretty observant. There's a lot going on here. You can be as picky and meticulous as you want to be, but remember, the point here is to get your quilt quilted and enjoy the process. It's not necessarily to go after absolute perfection. That's really time-consuming and kind of impossible to achieve. And I'm thinking about going over this quilt once it's done with a magic marker and coloring in all these spots. So, I can always fix it that way. This is going to be a tablecloth quilt, so it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. And really, this is more than anything else, practice, experimentation, it's fun play. And it's a process of learning. Here again, I overshot that line just ever so slightly. If I pull my ruler down, I'm going to get a little peak as my ruler foot bounces back. Instead, I'm just going to own it, press my ruler against that foot, and angle it back that way. And you can see how that ended up looking. It's ever so slightly off, but not nearly as bad as I think a wild little stitch would look. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot about quilting pinstripe matrix maze, both with a walking foot and with the slice ruler on a long arm. This is a really fun process. As you can see, it can be a little slow no matter which style of quilting you're doing, but it's great to have many different types of quilting under your belt and to understand that there's more than one way of doing this. If you'd like to learn more about the slice ruler and be able to quilt on both a home machine and long arm with it, you can check it out at leahday.com/slice. Now the long arm that I'm quilting on is the Grace Unique 15R, and I'm quilting on the Continuum quilting frame. And I love this frame because it can grow with you. If I decide to get a bigger machine, it can expand this way. If I ever get more space, which would be nice, I can also add a 2-foot extension and go from an 8-foot frame to a 10-foot frame. So for those reasons, I really love this Continuum quilting frame, and I really love the Grace Unique as well. You can learn more about this machine and the frame at leahday.com/15R. Until next time, let's go quilt.